What is going on, guys, and welcome to a video on the top 10 scariest true ghost stories. If you like this video, then don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe, and don't forget to click the bell notification so you don't miss any videos. So let's get started with number 10. Haunted by my sister's doll. This is a true story by a girl called Roxanne. Ever since Roxanne was at school with friends talking about Chucky, they've been afraid of dolls. Luckily, the one they had at home was just a basic Barbie doll. But then for Christmas, her sister got 2 porcelain dolls and a big rag doll. Those dolls really freaked Roxanne out. Every time she went into her sister's room, she would turn the dolls towards the wall so they weren't looking at them or into their rooms. Soon, creepy things started happening. Cuts and scratches would appear on Roxanne's hands and knees with no explanation of how they got there. One morning when she woke up, there were red scratches on her back, although she didn't remember any pain or feeling of being scratched. The scariest thing happened while she was home alone. She went into her sister's room to play with her Dreamcast. As she made her way into the room, she turned all the dolls towards the wall. She heard a little girl's laugh. The rag doll that had been lying on her sister's bed facing the wall slowly began turning towards her. She ran, locking herself in her room until her mother and sister got home. Neither believed her story, and her sister was mad because the rag doll had fallen to the floor. The next day, she took the doll to the dumpster and never saw it again. Now, number 9, my paranormal experience. This is a story told by a guy called Alex. When Alex was 16 or 17, he had just moved into a new house with his mother and sister. He had the bedroom in the basement. About a month after moving in, he started noticing bizarre things. Hangers would sway as though there was wind in the room, and he often heard light, unexplainable knocks in the middle of the night. It was creepy enough to make him move all of his belongings to the spare upstairs bedroom. One day, while he was playing video games in the basement, a white mist shot out from behind the television, up the wall and across the ceiling. He bolted out from the basement and told his mom, who told him it was just his imagination. Over the next few months, he started hearing knocks and seeing objects move again. Slowly, it started getting stronger. Then whispers started, then painful screams. Soon it was happening every night without fail. One night he was left alone while his mother was away for business and his sister slept at a friend's. It was 1 AM and very little was happening, paranormally speaking. He was about to fall asleep when he heard a loud shriek of his name. He slept the rest of the night with the lights on. The next few months passed with only minor incidents, and then things really got crazy. Late one night, he was watching television in his room when his bed started shaking. At first, it was only a small tremor, so he ignored it. Then, he began feeling something pulling at the covers from his foot of his bed. A cold hand grabbing his ankle and tried dragging him. He screamed and his mom and sister came running. At that point, it was clear something very weird was going on. His mother called the people who sold them the house and told them what was happening. The former owners, although offering no reason for the intrusions, had their priest come to bless the house. The occurrences never fully stopped, but they did become much less frequent and intrusive after the blessing. Moving on to number 8. There's something terrorizing my family. This is a true story by a girl named Chloe. About 2 weeks ago, Chloe's little sister began hearing voices. She said it's a deep, masculine voice that calls to her at the night in her room, telling her to come outside. It comes from outside in the middle of the yard. One day, their parents went out and Chloe, their 2 little sisters, their friends stayed home alone. That night, they saw something moving in a small patch of trees in their backyard. Telling the younger girls to stay inside, she went to investigate but found nothing. On her way back inside, something threw her over 5 feet into the air. She scrambled to her feet and ran inside, losing a shoe in the process. After cowering inside for a few minutes, she realised she needed that shoe for work the next day, so she ventured back outdoors. This time, she came prepared, bringing her dog with her for protection, but he refused to follow her into the backyard. As quickly as she could, she grabbed her shoe and ran back inside. Finally, back indoors. She asked the elder of her sisters to look at her because it felt like it was burning on her back. She pulled up her shirt and screamed. There were several long scratches running down her back. The 4 then went out to the front porch while the youngest went back inside to retrieve something, but she came back a few seconds later saying someone was looking into their back window. The only problem with that, in order for her to see someone in the window, that person would have to have been over 7 feet tall. Now all thoroughly freaked out, they decided to remain on the porch until their parents came home. After a few minutes passed, they heard the heavy footprints running towards the front yard from the side of the house where the driveway extends. Gravel through as it was being kicked up, but nothing was there. They went back inside until their mothers got home. Whatever that thing was, it didn't appear to be able to get inside the house. Chloe and her sisters still believe it's hanging around the house to this day. Number 7. Name calling and strange breathing. This is a true story by a guy named Robert. Robert has always been afraid of anything paranormal. For 5 years when he was young, he suffered from severe anxiety and depression. While this was going on, some strange things started happening. One night he was having trouble sleeping when he heard a man's voice say his name. He blew it off as something in his head and eventually fell asleep. A few nights later he heard it again, but this time it was louder, clear as day, and a woman's voice. He tried to respond, but the room was silent. At this point, he was starting to get nervous. Once again, the nights following were quiet, so he slowly forgot about the incident. That was until one night when he was lying in bed and started hearing someone breathing. He hid under the covers until it stopped, but the incident made it hard for him to sleep during the week following. Now he has moved and learned to better manage his depression and anxiety. The paranormal occurrences have stopped. So was it in his head, or did it really happen? Guess we'll never know. So now, moving on to number 6, Ghost in the House. This is a true story by a woman called Megan. Megan has always been into paranormal and has experienced a fair number of encounters throughout her life. Recently married, Megan and her spouse Charlie moved into a beautiful little house in a quiet neighbourhood. She had only been living there a short time when she started noticing strange occurrences. This happened while Charlie was upstairs in bed and Megan was downstairs watching television. Suddenly, Charlie ran into the living room and asked if Megan had just been in her bedroom. She answered no, and Charlie panicked. He said that he was lying in bed and someone had pushed the blanket up so his feet were exposed and a cold hand had caressed his foot. To avoid the spirit, they moved bedrooms to another room in the house. But the activity continued. They heard heavy footsteps going up and downstairs. Bowls and pans would spin clockwise on the counter. Dark, full-bodied figures would pass their bedroom door and vanish. A knife was once lifted and thrown across the kitchen by an unseen force, and the dogs would bark into the corners of the house. Once, they even looked up at the window of the master bedroom and saw an elderly woman staring down at them. Eventually, they had to talk with the neighbours to learn of the history of the house. They learned that the house had been built in the 1970s. And an elderly lady who had owned the house before them died at age 101. The two had no doubt this one was the spirit tormenting the home, so Megan decided to go upstairs and make peace. She informed the spirit that she intended to remain in the house and she promised to keep it nice. She offered to help her cross over, but also said she was welcome to stay if her presence became more peaceful. Since then, the couple has been living peacefully in the home and the woman occasionally makes herself known. We're halfway there with number 5, Threatening Footsteps in the Country. This is a true story by Jennifer. In 2013, Jennifer and her friends decided to make a Ouija board. Her best friend lives about 45-minute drive from the closest store and the nearest town, so there wasn't much to do. They'd spend the day watching movies, but eventually got bored. So Jennifer, her friend, the friend's boyfriend, and his friend decided to make the board. About a week before they made the board, the two friends had been staying alone at the house when Jennifer woke up at 6 AM to the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway nearing the bedroom. She tried to wake her friend, but it was no use. She was a heavy sleeper. The footsteps stopped right outside the door. She waited, holding her breath, for the door to open, but it never did. The next few hours she spent awake, waiting for something to happen. When both girls were finally awake at 11 in the morning, before either of them left the room, she told her friend what had happened the night before, and what her friend said in response chilled her to the bone. She said that for years she'd be hearing the same footsteps and that they'd always stopped right outside her bedroom. No one else had heard the footsteps until Jennifer. That night they made their Ouija board. The group were messing around with it, not getting any real responses, when they suddenly heard a loud bang in the back of the house. They decided to stop for the night. The friend left to drive the others two home, leaving Jennifer alone in the house. Being alone after hearing the loud noise and the footsteps made her nervous, so she turned on the television for a distraction, while she waited for her friend to return. In the middle of the opening credits, the television froze and started making a loud buzzing noises. She tried to turn off the TV, but the remote wouldn't work. Then she tried unplugging it, but it kept going. Thoroughly freaked out, she went outside to wait for her friend to get back. At this point, she had started shaking and crying and texted her friend explaining what had happened. Then the dogs started barking at the living room door, viciously growling and snarling like they saw something no human could. 30 minutes later, her friend finally arrived back home. Both girls could hear the television from the porch, but when they went inside, it had completely shut off as it was unplugged still. Neither are sure exactly what happened, but they're certain it was some kind of malevolent spirit. Number 4, Ouija board warning. This is a true story by a woman called Jane. Last year, Jane went to a friend's house for a party. Around 1 in the morning, the group decided to use the Ouija board. Jane was the only one who believed in the account of the paranormal, so she was hesitant when her friend brought out the board. But instead of giving her friends more reason to tease her when it came to the paranormal, she acted as if she didn't believe in such activity. They began asking the board questions. They started with a few normal questions and nothing really exciting happened. Then when someone asked the spirit if it wanted to hurt them, it responded with only one. The group started to get creeped out at this point, and rightfully so. When one friend asked the natural follow-up question, who, the board spelled out Jane. Jane then left the room while her friends continued playing, but found out later that night that the group forgot to say goodbye. Anyone familiar with the Ouija board knows that closing interaction with the spirit is crucial before stopping use of the board. Needless to say, she was nervous. After this, Jane has no memory of the night. She only remembers getting a migraine and nosebleeds. Her friends took videos of her acting strangely, speaking with a changed voice, and a few instances of her talking in other languages. However, that night wasn't the only time this happened. In days following, Jane's parent reported the same things happening. Once again, she remembers nothing but migraines and nosebleeds. After about 2 weeks later, she went back to normal, or so she thought. Jane was suddenly hospitalised for an excruciating pain in her kidney, so bad that it was almost shut down. The doctors tried everything but couldn't figure out what was wrong. Then on the day she was scheduled for surgery, the pain suddenly stopped. 1 day later, Jane was released. Since that incident, she was never felt like she was truly alone. Sometimes she feels someone grabbing her hands or neck, making it difficult to breathe. Jane has always believed in the paranormal, but this experience made it far more real for her. Now it's time for number 3. The Lady in the Corner. This is a true story by a guy named Cody. Strange things had been happening in Cody's house for as long as he can remember. One night, he woke up to the sound of someone standing outside of his room, the floor creaking under their weight. He closed his eyes and pretended to be asleep, hoping it would leave them alone. Whatever it was that entered the room, it stopped right beside the bed. He could feel the presence there. He cracked open his eyes, hoping to still appear asleep while stealing a glimpse at the presence. A white figure stood in front of him. At first, he wanted to call to his brother, but he was too afraid to antagonize the ghost. Eventually, his eyes closed, and when he opened them again in a few minutes later, the figure was gone. Thinking his father's bedroom would be the safer place to sleep, he wrapped himself in a blanket and made his way across the house. But when he entered the dining room, he felt as though several pairs of eyes were staring at him. He kept going until he reached the doors of the bedroom, but it was locked. Instead of going back to the room, he went into the living room and fell asleep. Around 4 in the morning, he woke again, and sitting on top of the television in the corner was a white figure. This time, it was as clear as the figure was an elderly woman. She was somewhat blurry, and her eyes were darker than her pale body. She said his name and tried coaxing them outside. He screamed and the figure vanished. He hid under the blanket until morning. When daylight had come, he told their story to his family. His brother believed every word, saying he had seen the exact same figure watching him. Now it's time for number 2, Touched by a Spirit. This is a true story by a woman named Holly. One night, Holly was at a friend's house. She was downstairs watching a movie, and the friend upstairs was playing video games. Feeling neglected, she fell asleep despite feeling deeply uncomfortable, like she was being watched. She went back to sleep after asking her friend if he'd be coming to bed soon. When she woke again, it was someone touching her face, saying, "Don't worry love, I'll be down soon." She disregarded it as a dream and went back to sleep. Then she awoke again by the same voice saying, I know. I keep using the same excuse. I'm coming home. I really do miss you." This time, she knew something wasn't right. She got out of the bed and searched the entire downstairs area but found nothing. She heard snoring upstairs and knew her friend was sound asleep. Since it was now 7 in the morning, she got ready and left for work. The next time they were together, she asked her friend if he'd been messing with her that night. He said no. But at that moment, a song came on the car radio and sounded exactly like the voice. She asked who the singer was, and he said it was his friend's band. His friend had been the lead singer but had committed suicide a year before. They'd lived together for a while and most of his stuff was still in the house. It appears that at least his dead ghost friend hadn't wanted her to be alone. Now it's finally time for number 1, The Shoes in the Riverbed. This is a true story by a guy called Tyler. A few years ago, Tyler had been through a rough divorce from his high school sweetheart. His best friend had taken to distracting him by taking him on road trips. One morning, they were on their way to Mexico when they paused alongside a river dam. They were drinking cider and snacking when the pair decided to explore the dried riverbed. It was obvious that they weren't the first ones to go trekking through the riverbed. The pair could see human, canine and feline footprints footprints in the mud. They then recall started to feeling an odd sensation, like they were being watched. His friend caught Tyler's attention and called them over. There was a bone in the ground, what they now believe was a spinal cord. At first they thought it was a beef or pork bone of some kind. They continued looking around the riverbed and they found a strange rust-coloured rock sticking from the sand. When they got closer, they realised it was half-buried little girl's shoe. Tyler stepped back, ran forward, preparing to kick the shoe. Suddenly, he heard a little girl's voice shout, "No, don't, please." He looked around but didn't see anyone beside his best friend. The friend asked why he stopped and he replied, "Didn't you hear that little girl?" Both confused, they decided to shrug it off and continue their way. Meanwhile, the feeling that someone was watching them grew stronger. A few minutes later, they spotted another bone. Now they begin to get scared. The bone was clearly human. The friend called the non-emergency police number for Mexico and they reported what they saw. 1 week later, he received a call from his friend telling him that the police had called to report the bones they found were indeed human. During the investigation, two were questioned and eventually informed that the rust-coloured rock actually wasn't a rock at all, but the shell of a pickup truck that had disappeared along with the family of three he had been carrying: a man, a woman, and their daughter. It made Tyler think back to the girl's shoes sticking out of the mud and the voice he heard. Could the little girl have spoken directly to him? Thank you for watching my video, guys. I know it was a long one. I just wanted to read as much as I could on the true ghost stories for you guys. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, then please don't forget to give it a thumbs up and also subscribe, as I do work quite hard on the videos. And also click the bell notification so you never miss a video when I upload. So thank you for watching, guys, and again I'll see you in the next video.